Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well, and I hope that your week is going well. Welcome back to another week of our Writing 440 online class. And the purpose of this video lecture is to talk about one of the things about writing that everyone doesn't want to talk about and dreads talking about, and that is grammar. And that is why grammar is important and why we need to understand the role that grammar plays in our writing and in the way that we communicate. But before we get to that, I just wanted to say a couple words about the Anne Lamott shitty first drafts essay that I had you guys read for last week. I'm glad many of you enjoyed it. I'm glad many of you benefited from that. I know in reading your comments and your reflections on the essay, a lot of you said it helped you think about writing in a new way. It helped you relax a little bit about writing. It helped you not put as much pressure on yourself when it comes to writing something perfect the very first time that you do it, and putting a lot of strain and stress on yourself when it comes to writing something. And that was really the purpose of it, is to just serve as a little bit of an opportunity to get a different perspective about writing from someone who has done it and done it well and done it professionally for a long time, but also to give you a chance to see that no piece of writing is perfect on the first draft. And the reason that we spend so much time drafting and talking about drafts and working on drafts when we write is so that we can ultimately get to that final polished piece, or relatively polished piece, that we feel comfortable with and that we feel like represents our best writing and our best thinking. So I had a chance to meet Anne Lamott several years ago at a conference, and I can tell you she is exactly like you think she would be in person when you meet her. So in other words, the way she writes in her essay is pretty much the way she talks to you when you meet with her or when you hear her speak about writing or about anything that she's done in her career. So she is very much one of those what you see is what you get kind of writers and kind of people. So it was fascinating getting to meet her. But I know that the article, the Shitty First Drafts article, is something that I refer to often. And I think I mentioned this in some of my feedback to you all. I refer to it often when I need some inspiration or motivation for writing, or I find myself stuck in something or worried about something that I'm working on in my writing. Oftentimes we'll go back and either read the entire article or read just a small excerpt of that article, because there's just so much good information, good food for thought that she puts in there, and does it in a really entertaining and engaging way. So it helps me as a writer, and I'm glad that it helped you, and I'm glad that it was something that you enjoyed. So moving on from that, we're going to talk about one of the aspects of writing, as I mentioned, that nobody likes to talk about, nobody wants to deal with when it comes to writing, and that is grammar. If you mention the word grammar to anyone who is a writer, who writes a lot for their profession, who doesn't write a lot for their profession, or doesn't consider themselves a writer, it doesn't matter. You mention the word grammar, and you can just watch the color drain from their face, and you can just watch them roll their eyes, or you can watch them kind of look to the left and look to the right of wherever they're sitting or standing. And in their mind, they're thinking, oh my goodness, how can I get out of here, out of this room, out of this classroom, out of this setting that I'm in, before we have to talk about grammar. And grammar is one of those things, I think, that we have sort of a sour opinion of, because the way we were exposed to grammar in elementary school and in middle school was basically rote memorization and drill and practice, memorizing all of the comma rules and doing worksheets where we demonstrate we understand what those rules are, or having to memorize all the prepositional phrases and take a test where we list all the prepositional phrases. And that is a very good way to learn grammar, and that is a very good way to learn the concepts and the terminology and find out how it applies in sentences and in paragraphs. But oftentimes at the same time, that makes us fearful of grammar. And it's a thing too, once we get out of elementary school and middle school, we get into high school, a lot of our English experiences is mostly literature. Maybe you had that experience when you were in high school. Or we get into college, and we take a composition course, or we take a couple of composition courses, and grammar is emphasized or not emphasized very much. And so it's one of those things, we use it for a period of time in our schooling life really intensely, and then we don't use it as much as we get older and as we transition into high school and college. But one thing that I wanted you to know about grammar is it is important. And this isn't a grammar class, and so we're not going to be spending weeks and weeks and weeks going over all of the comma rules and all of the declarative sentence rules and semicolon usage and all of that. We're just not going to do that. That's not what we're doing in this class. But I do want you to see that grammar is something that someone who is reading a sentence that you have written, if grammar is not used correctly, they're going to know something is off with the sentence. They're not going to be able to tell you comma rule 7.1 was violated in that sentence, or you didn't apply semicolon rule 3 to that particular sentence, but they're going to know that something's not quite right with that sentence. And oftentimes it's a grammar mistake. We also come to grammar, I think, fearful of it and not liking it. In addition to the rote sort of drill and practice, we also come to it because a lot of us have had experiences where if we had a comma usage error in one of our sentences, or we didn't use the semicolons properly, or we had created a sentence fragment with our punctuation, we got 15 points taken off our essays for every time we misused that particular aspect or that particular grammar rule incorrectly, that particular aspect of the grammar rule incorrectly. And so it makes us really fearful to even try to use grammar or to try to use commas or to try to use semicolons, because we're so afraid that if we do it incorrectly, someone's going to come with a big red pen and circle it, and it's going to be minus a lot of points on our essay, or minus a letter grade, or whatever it might be. Well, we don't want to approach grammar that way. We shouldn't approach grammar that way. So I wanted to talk for just a couple of minutes with you today about grammar and about why, when we think about grammar in the accounting profession, and we think about ourselves as writers, and we think about ourselves as not just accountants, but as writers, how does this work, and why grammar is important. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to just go over some information with you briefly about grammar and why grammar matters. And as I mentioned just a few moments ago, it's so much more than the grammar rules. It's so much more than just being able to memorize all of those comma usage rules and everything that is involved with that. It's so much more than that. It's really about credibility in your writing and establishing credibility in your writing, mastery of language and mastery of the concepts that you're trying to communicate to an audience, and also doing it in a way that is specific to your voice and to your style of writing, and also communicates the message that you want to use. And this is one of my favorite statements or favorite phrases about grammar. This comes from a woman named Isabel Cutts, who's the managing director for Page Personnel Finance. And she was asked one time to talk about grammar and why do business and finance and accountants and people in that profession need to pay attention to grammar. And here's what she said. She says, apart from good commercial skills, and commercial skills, she means, your ability to do your job, to do the job duties that you've been trained to do. So if you're an accountant, it's filing taxes and crunching numbers and balancing ledgers and all of those things that you get trained to do. So apart from those skills, apart from commercial skills, communication skills, and the necessary accountancy qualifications, companies also value exceptional softer skills such as spelling and grammar. And so we talked a little bit about softer skills in the last module, and we talked a little bit about thinking about ourselves as accountants and in the accounting profession as writers. And so what Isabel is saying in this particular statement is that those skills are important, that those skills, being able to do what you've been trained to do as an accountant or as a finance person or as a business manager, all of that is important. But the softer skills, one of the softer skills like spelling and grammar, really has an important role in the way that we communicate and in the kind of message that we're trying to disseminate to a particular audience. So why does grammar matter? Why do we need to pay attention to it, to focus on it, and to consider it when we are writing? Well, one of the things we want to think about is what we want our business communication to be. What do we want our writing as accountants to do? Well, I think there's three things we all want it to do, no matter what it is we're creating. If it's a memo, if it's an email, if it is a white paper, if it is a letter of intent, if it is a sales proposal, whatever it is that we're doing and whatever it is that we're writing, we want that communication to be purposeful, we want it to be professional, and we want it to be easily understood. Those are the three things that should really drive every piece of correspondence and piece of writing that we generate in this profession, in accounting, in business and finance, and in that realm. It should apply to any major. It should apply to any discipline. No matter what it is that you're majoring in, but especially in business, especially in business and accounting and those kinds of fields. You want it to be purposeful, professional, and easily understood. And one of the ways you help that be accomplished in your writing and in your correspondence is through a good use of grammar and using grammar as efficiently and effectively as possible. So one of the things that you also want to think about with grammar is you want to make sure that the recipient of that communication, we want it to be purposeful, professional, and easily understood, but you want the recipient of that communication also to be able to understand exactly what it is that you need them to do or exactly what it is that you need them to understand without having to guess or to interpret or to assume what it is you were trying to mean in that particular sentence, in that particular paragraph, in that particular memo, in that particular email, whatever it is. You want to make sure that they get the message clearly and accurately the first time. And one of the ways we confuse an audience and one of the ways we muddle that message as writers is when we have grammar mistakes. And again, it's one of those things, the reader's not going to say, oh, yes, you violated comma rule 1.2, or, oh, you know what? You've got a dependent clause and next to an independent clause sandwiched in between a subordinate clause. No one's going to know exactly what's particularly wrong with that sentence, but the grammar and the lack of accuracy with it is going to trip them up, and they're not going to be able to take in that message. And we'll talk more as we get into some of our more major assignments going forward about how important it is to get that message communicated. We've talked a little bit already about audience. We'll get into some more of that as the semester unfolds. But grammar is one of the things that muddy up the water, so to speak, when it comes to the recipient taking in the message. And sometimes a reader is going to make an assumption about you as the writer based on your grammar usage. One of the things that makes writing for accountancy and business and technical writing and scientific and technical writing as a discipline so different from composition and from literature courses or creative writing is oftentimes not only are you writing for yourself and or your employer or supervisor or manager or whomever, but you're writing for a wide audience, particularly if you're in a position where you were trying to solicit business from someone else. You are creating something that has your name on it, but it also has the logo or the letterhead or the masthead of the company or business that you're working for. And so not only do people make assumptions about you as a writer or a thinker based on what they read in terms of the message that you're trying to communicate, but they also make assumptions, and incorrectly or correctly, about the company or firm that you are working for. So you're not just writing for yourself, you're not just writing for one other person, you're writing oftentimes for a wide audience, and they're going to make assumptions about the way that you can handle information and your level of professionalism really overall based on how well you communicate a message. And if you've got tons and tons of grammar mistakes and tons of sentence fragments and ideas that don't make sense in a piece of correspondence, they're going to make assumptions about you, which could include things like you've rushed it, you didn't take the time to do it, you're just lazy, maybe you don't know as much as I think you do, or you think that person thinks you do, or the client thinks you are or have, or whatever. You have to keep that in mind, that grammar leads to that impression. It can lead to that impression that you don't want. And you really want to make sure that in everything that you do, as we talked about with purposeful, professional, and easily understood messages, you really want to make sure that you are as accurate and as thorough as needed for the particular writing situation and for the particular audience that you are targeting. And we're going to get into more of that later in the semester as we start working on some more of our larger assignments. But one of the ways you create those thoughtful, polished messages is through good writing, clear, concise writing, but also good use of grammar. So those are some things about why grammar matters. And we've talked about some of this already, but I thought I would mention it here again in terms of sending those correct messages. Grammar is also not just about commas and semicolons and independent clauses and all of that. It's about effective word choice. It's about saying what you mean in a clear and concise way that your audience is going to understand. If you're writing something accounting specific to a broad audience, to people who are going to have a background in accounting, but maybe not have a background in accounting, you want to make sure that you use effective word choice that's clear and concise. Maybe you don't want a lot of sentences in your particular memo that have a lot of compound complex sentences where there's a lot of commas and semicolons needed. Maybe just some shorter, more concise sentences are what you need for that particular document that you're creating or that particular piece of writing you're generating for that particular audience. You have to think about that. So word choice factors in to this overall smaller discussion, or factors in as a smaller point in this overall larger discussion about grammar. Again, sentence is very important. You want to make sure that you have clear, concise information. You tell the audience and the reader what you need them to know. You define any complex terms that maybe they don't understand that are specific to accounting or specific to the situation you're writing about. Define that for them. Don't take it for granted. Don't assume that they know what it is that you're writing about, because oftentimes they won't know unless you tell them. And so one of the things to keep in mind when we think about writing, we think about grammar, we're not trying to wow the reader here. We're not trying to, impress them with flowery language. We're not writing a novel. We are not writing an epistolary piece. We're not writing a poem. We are not trying to show how much we know about a particular topic or how well we can write it and how flowery we can make it when we write. We're just trying to get our point across clearly, accurately, concisely, and with the right detail that is needed for the specific writing situation, targeted to the audience that we want to make sure understands what it is that we are creating. So that's what makes sort of writing for accounting and really business and technical writing in general different from other modes of writing, is that, we're not trying to fill it full of 50-cent words, if you've heard that expression used before. That's not our purpose. That's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to communicate clearly, accurately, and concisely. And that's really, really important. And that really helps the reader. It eases their frustration and makes them more likely to read the document that you have created and also do what you need them to do, follow those next steps. And I mentioned credibility, really important when we think about grammar. Oftentimes grammar, word choice, good sentence selection, all of that really makes a positive first impression. And I put an example here. I saw this a number of years ago, and I can't remember exactly where I saw it, but I was out of town and I was on a trip, and I was downtown somewhere, and I believe this was in St. Louis, actually, St. Louis, Missouri. And I was downtown, and they had the billboards up where people would come up and tack things onto the wall. I need a roommate. I got a car for sale. Those kinds of things. Well, there was something called Peace of Mind Tutoring Service. And I think it should have said Peace of Mind, P-E-A-C-E, but it read Peace of Mind, P-I-E-C-E, of Mind Tutoring Service. And maybe you've heard that expression, or you've done this to someone. You've given someone a piece of their mind, or you've said, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to tell my girlfriend, my boyfriend, my mom, my dad, my boss, I'm going to give that person a piece of my mind. Well, when you see P-I-E-C-E of Mind Tutoring Service, that's what I thought of. I thought, uh-oh, somebody's going to give someone the business about this tutoring service. And I don't think that's what they were going for. They were going for Peace of Mind, P-E-A-C-E, of Mind Tutoring Service. But I don't know anything about that tutoring service. I didn't know what they charge, what services they provide. But the first thing that caught my attention was sort of that grammar, sentence structure misuse there. The misuse of peace and peace, which is a homonym. As a grammar term. And so the misuse of that's the first thing that I thought of, and I chuckled a little bit and it was funny. But then I kind of moved on. I didn't investigate further. If I was someone that needed a tutor for my son or daughter or niece or nephew or whomever it might be, that may not be the tutoring service I would contact, because especially if they needed English, grammar, and or writing assistance because they got peace and peace mixed up. But you get my point. First impressions mean a lot. First impressions are made and assumptions are based, and future steps, future relationships are developed or not developed based on that. So one of the things you want to think about with grammar is you want to give it sort of that final inspection. You want to make sure that you give it sort of the attention and reliability that it needs. Maybe that involves getting somebody else in on it to help you. I've had students in class in Writing 440 before that will partner up and they will read aloud each other's work. And they'll say, well, does this sound good? Am I making sense? And having somebody hear it for the first time, or having somebody look over, your draft, or look over your outline, or look over your whatever it is, the steps in the process, wherever you may be, third draft, fourth draft of what you're working on. Sometimes a fresh set of eyes can provide a lot of perspective and insight that you miss because you've been so closely working on that piece of writing for a long time. So bringing in that second set of ears or second set of eyes is helpful. That's done all the time in business and industry. And that's fine. That's how you get sort of that attentiveness and reliability and accuracy issue. And then I put a couple of examples here: desert buffet, and dessert buffet. You have to be careful about certain word choice grammar constructions because it does not always get caught in spell checker. And I've had some students say, "Nah, not worried about it. I'm just going to have spell check run it. It'll be fine." Well, they don't pick up, obviously, everything. I'm not so sure if you typed in peace of mind tutoring service and peace of mind tutoring service either way, that you would get a squiggly line there because it doesn't recognize the homonym as being incorrect. Just like sometimes a desert buffet and a dessert buffet may not get you that squiggly red line in Microsoft Word. So, you want to make sure that when you look at grammar and you think about word choice and sentence structure and all those things that we've talked about, you do want to make sure that you give it some time and some attention. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to let it paralyze you. You don't want to be so worried in the drafting process about, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to put a comma here. Well, what if this comma is wrong? Or, oh my goodness, I really think I'm going to have to use a lot of compound complex sentences in this memo or in this white paper or in this proposal I'm doing. Oh my gosh, I'm terrible at commas. And you got to stop telling yourself that. You worry about that later. There are steps in the writing process that you've probably heard of and familiar with. There's writing, there's revision, there's proofreading, and then there's editing. The grammar issues and those word choice issues and all of that comes towards the bottom, towards the proofreading and editing stage. That's where you take one final look at it. That's where you look at it for the final time. You make the final changes as necessary, and you make sure that you have your grammar, your syntax, your word choice, your sentence structure, all of that just the way that you want it. But oftentimes, because of our experiences with grammar, positive and negative, lots of times negative, we're so afraid of making a grammar mistake that we don't get and make the kind of progress in our writing that we need to. We don't make the kind of progress in our drafts that we should because we're so overly concerned that we're going to make a mistake, or we're going to have that comma in the wrong place, and I'm going to have 10 points taken off this assignment every time I do that wrong, and I can't remember, I haven't had grammar, so blah, 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 blah. So you have to just watch out for all of that because that can really spiral you down into some negative thinking, or what I had a former boss call stinking thinking. You don't want any stinking thinking when it comes to that. But know that grammar is important for the reasons that we've talked about and the reasons that we've highlighted here, as is sentence structure, word choice, and all of that. But the most important thing is you deal with a lot of those issues towards the end of the document, when you get down to the editing and proofreading stage. Or proofreading and editing stage. Some people like to flip them around, but as long as you kind of invest some time into both of those, it'll be time well spent. So we worry about those towards the end. What you want to do in the writing and revision stage is get your ideas down, get them structured and organized in a way that it's going to communicate the message you're trying to communicate, and that your audience is going to be able to understand, okay, this is what I need to understand. This is how I need to respond. This is what I need to do next. So again, grammar, not something we like to talk about, not a fun topic that we like to talk about. It's not something that wins us lots of points with our friends and with our classmates and with our professors, but it is something we need to consider and think about, and it does have a place and it is important. But what we can't worry about is memorizing the grammar handbook, and we can't worry about making sure that we have every comma rule memorized and every single usage term memorized. Nobody has them memorized. If anyone tells you they do, they're not telling you the truth. But we do need to give it some attention. It does need some attention because it does either help clarify and strengthen the message we're trying to convey, or it can unclarify and sort of muddy up the message that we're trying to say. So that's all I wanted to share with you and talk with you about today with grammar. The work in the modules this week kind of deals with grammar just a little bit, kind of refresh your memory, gives you a chance to sort of assess your skills, where you are as a writer with grammar, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, and maybe some things to keep in mind, some things that you want to be aware of going forward in the class as we start working on some of our assignments. Some things to keep in mind. You'll have a better understanding of maybe where your strengths are with grammar and some things that you need to keep in mind as you work through the proofreading and editing stage of your assignments. So that's all I have to say for this particular video lecture about grammar. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns about that or any of the assignments in the module this week, and I will talk to you again soon.